Our next speaker is Andrew Mayle. Andrew Mayle is the deputy editor of Mojo magazine. He spoke at Boring 2012 about the history of and meaning of yellow lines, and you can see what he's talking about this time. Please welcome Andrew Mayle.
I first saw it in 2010 in a documentary about Ronnie Lane, the singer and bass guitarist with the faces and the small faces. We'd just reached a really interesting part of the documentary. Ronnie had moved to Wales and was investing his rockstar thousands in a sort of travelling musical circus. And then Eric Clapton appeared, and I realised that I wasn't listening to the documentary anymore. I was staring at Eric Clapton's bookshelf. Eric Clapton's bookshelf concerned me. I like seeing book collections in films and documentaries. I like deciding whether they convince. Most recently, one of my favorites was Morse's dog-eared paperbacks in the new series of Endeavour. Or whether, as in a 2008 New Yorker profile of George Clooney, the bookshelf has actually been pre-selected by an interior designer. Or purchased in bulk online at booksbythefoot.com, where you can furnish your study according to the colour, height, subject, age, genre, or width of the book. I like all that. I'm interested in all that kind of stuff. And here was a collection of books that bothered me. My eye was troubled. What was so disturbing about it? The Vapid Glass Award on the far left, those little tiny guitars. I mean, another possible award, but I don't think so. A little aside, should Rockstar libraries be interesting? You know, am I expecting ancient hide-backed volumes on occult philosophy? Clapton's Spartan cabinet offers little of that. Apart from, there's a copy of Fowler's Modern English Usage next to the guitars. But apart from that, it appears to be a sort of refuge from the intellectual. I mean, a third of the space is given over to nothing. If a bookshelf is an indicator of a person's character, and I think probably a lot of people in this room would tend to sort of think it is, this seemed simultaneously bleak and unknowable. I mean, there's some art books, there's some guitar books, I couldn't see it, no visible novels. There's a sort of thing you defiantly dull. And maybe, it was one of those large format bookshelves in a little used guest room. Or perhaps he was in a hotel room, you know, nearby hotel for the documentary filmmakers, stocked with discount remainders from the works. I thought, that's it. Stop bothering yourself about this. Let it all go. And then I saw it again. In 2011, Martin Scorsese directed a 3.5-hour documentary about George Harrison, him from the Beatles, yeah. And 40 minutes into this 210-minute documentary, there was the bookshelf again. Except it looks different this time. He's had a clear out. One of the little guitars is still there, and the Glass Award, but a lot of the books have gone. And in their place, I don't know if you can see that next to one of the awards, is a framed cover of Motorsport magazine. But it's not a real cover of Motorsport magazine. Their site's brilliant, you should go onto it, motorsport.com. They've got an archive of every cover, and I looked through them all. And it's not there. And also, how do I know resolutely that it's not an actual cover of Motorsport magazine? Because the man in the picture, and I did know this, is sitting on the Alpine bobsleigh at Alton Towers. See, there's not a lot of recognition here. The ride only ran from 1980 to 1986, when it was dismantled due to repeated incidents of small children without helmets hitting hard concrete at high speeds. But the man in the picture, it's not Eric. The man remained unidentified, and I did pursue it, but it was a dead end, and I let it rest. And then last year, the bookshelf... Oh, sorry, there you go. There's an actual picture of the Alpine bobsleigh and a child without a helmet, probably about to come to a sticky end. Last year, it turned up again. Blurred, lurking, still with the motorsport cover, in the background of a documentary about Clapton's former bandmate in Cream, the unpleasant rock drummer Ginger Baker. And then, again, off to the left, in a recent documentary about the blues legend B.B. King. This bookshelf was starting to niggle me. I mean, as well as this kind of almost palpable banality that it exuded, Clapton's bookshelf seemed suffused with something else, something I could only really describe to myself as a deep inner sadness. And it scared me. What was the sort of bland aura of this whited sepulchre? What was it trying to tell me? There's a 17th century English scholar called Sir Thomas Browne. He believed that all objects possess a language, a desire to be read. And I decided that this was what was happening here, that Eric Clapton's bookshelf wanted to be read. So I thought, let's try and decipher the secret metaphysical communiques of Eric Clapton's bookshelf. And by that, I meant that I got some of Eric Clapton's books out of the library. At first, it bothered me that so many of the spines in these frozen images were difficult to read, but then, with my Thomas Browne hat on, I realized that this was, of course, how the bookshelf was communicating. It would be ill-advised to read everything it was saying. Just read what you can. I overlooked the guitar books because I assumed they'd just be full of guitars. But instead, I started with the easiest spine to read in the first image, which is a book called Europe's Elite 1000. The Ultimate List, 2001 edition, published by Cadogan. When it first came out, it was intended for release every 10 years. Every 10 years, Europe's Elite 1000 would produce this, what it describes as a unique guide to the most prestigious companies and individuals in Europe. It's basically a big list of expensive shops, high-end companies, private banks, and millionaires. Having a copy of Europe's Elite 1000 on your bookshelf, a statement of power, wealth, exclusivity. It's a statement only slightly diminished by the fact that Eric's not in it. And neither are any of his companies. And Cadogan went out of business after publishing the 2001 Europe's Elite 1000 list, which perhaps makes it more elite, but possibly not in the way that they intended. So here we have a millionaire, undoubtedly one of Europe's elite, but with a list of elite European millionaires on his shelf, but he's not in it, and the publishers are defunct. So I said, is a score being settled here? A message transmitted? The keen-eyed amongst you will have also spotted two art books on Eric's shelf, to remind you in case you missed them as they flew by. One was on Picasso and the other one was on Chagall. And I thought, well, maybe Eric likes Picasso and Chagall. Maybe Eric owns a Picasso or a Chagall. But there was something else. I started to read a bit deeper into the lives of Picasso and Chagall. There they are. And it turns out they both admired each other, but they both showed it via a very complex love-hate relationship. Many felt that Picasso's celebrity tended to overshadow the sort of equal worth of his slightly less charismatic friend. I took that and I filed it. I thought that was interesting. The next book from Eric's shelf was called Stephane Grappelli, With and Without Django by Paul Bellmer. It's about the French jazz violinist Stephane Grappelli and his love-hate relationship with the gypsy guitarist Django Reinhardt. As Bellmer says in the book, the mythology of Django haunted Stephane in his music making and clouded many people's understanding of Grappelli's genius. Another talented artist, there they are, sorry, I forgot about that. Another talented artist whose work is dwarfed by the achievement of a far more charismatic friend. I realized it was time to read Eric Clapton's autobiography. Now, you may already know this, but Eric Clapton's father was a Canadian soldier. He shipped off to war just before Clapton was born, and then he went back to Canada. He never came back to Britain. Eric's mum, Pat, was a 15-year-old schoolgirl from Ripley in Surrey. Eric was raised by his grandmother, Rose, and he thought Rose was his mum and Pat was his sister. And this sets something in place in the book. Perhaps as a consequence, Eric Clapton has a very difficult relationship with women. He doesn't appear to like them very much. He doesn't appear, the more you read the book, to like himself very much. This is kind of what we call an understatement. When Eric's band Blind Faith split in 1969, Eric retreated to an Edwardian mansion that he just bought called Hurtwood Edge. He binged on chocolates. He also binged on heroin. His friend, his important point here, his very good friend, George Harrison, reached out to him. But the mythology of George and the Beatles haunted Eric and his music making, and he felt clouded many people's understanding of Clapton's guitar genius. With his self-worth at its lowest, Eric responded to George's friendship by attempting to steal George's wife. When that failed, he hooked up with a 16-year-old schoolgirl and heiress called Alice Ormsby Gore and got her hooked on heroin. This is a bit of a grim bit, this. The two lived in druggy squalor for about 3 years at Hurtwood Edge. He sent her out to score the drugs, and he'd kind of sit at home in a kind of vengeful silence, ignoring her. They had dogs, but they never took the dogs for a walk for 3 years. You get the picture. So I thought, I'll look up Hurtwood Edge on Google Images. As Rodri says, along with Wikipedia, one of the essential journalistic tools. One of the first pictures that comes out when you look up Hurtwood Edge on Google Images is this. Hurtwood Edge is the home of Eric Clapton's bookshelf. There it is, in the mansion of heroin, silent anger, and dog shit. Now, Eric got off the heroin, and then he became an alcoholic, because a pattern had been set. Eric was angry and quiet and vengeful and paranoid and mean, especially to women, and always happier blaming someone other than himself. Eric Clapton's autobiography is one of the most miserable books I've ever read. But never mind, because still there is one book left, and this book is significant because Eric has 2 copies on his bookshelf. It is The Art of Jack Russell. Now, Jack Russell, in case you don't know, was an English international cricketer who retired following a back injury in 2004 and became a painter. Here he is, painting in Chipping Sodbury. And here is some of his work. A Jack Russell, another Jack Russell, and another Jack Russell. I can't recommend The Art of Jack Russell highly enough. I particularly like his celebrity portraits. Eric Sykes, Bill Pertwee from Dad's Army, and Norman Wisdom. They're quite something, aren't they? This is my favorite, though. Eric Clapton. Eric told me that he'd never sat for a portrait before, says Jack Russell in the book. I'm honored to be the first. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the only official portrait of Eric Clapton in existence. And I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant because I think it captures everything that I've been groping towards in the last 10 minutes. It's simultaneously brooding and bland. It's kind of intense and banal. I mean, I think it is a portrait of the real Eric Clapton. Clapton in extremis, haunted by self-hatred, overshadowed by his more charismatic friends. It kind of, I don't know if I'm reading too much of it, I think it kind of glowers with a profound, abstract unhappiness, a sinister loneliness. I mean, sad eyes peering forth from this bodiless human head, floating in a kind of white perdition, staring off with a look of vengeful boredom, violent ennui, the vindictiveness of defeat. I imagine Eric's wives know this look pretty well. It terrifies, and it kind of breaks your heart. Maybe Eric Clapton's bookshelf disturbs because it's, I don't know, some kind of site of slippage, some kind of liminal space in a house of old misdeeds. Maybe Eric Clapton's bookshelf hums with dullness because its stale order and those kind of constant rearrangements of the objects on it are a kind of barrier, a comfort, a sort of blank comfort against the greater threat, the threat that runs through the book, his autobiography, the giant sweating, black-winged beasts of addiction and depression that prey on Eric Clapton every day, and the white immensity of painful, endless days that stretch ahead of him, and the awful temptation to block it all out with the small taste of the cheeky half that would put him back on the booze or back on the brown. I'd love to know in which room of his Edwardian mansion Eric Clapton sat for his Jack Russell portrait, but I'm willing to take a wild guess. Thank you.